He's been at the centre of South Africa's political and economic turning points since the transition. A witness, a strategist, and at times a quiet architect. After nearly 2 decades as Goldman Sachs Sub-Saharan Africa chief and coming from a deeply activist family, Colin Coleman has spent his life straddling the worlds of struggle, business, and big picture thinking. And today I'm extremely excited and honored to welcome him on to SMWX. Colin Coleman, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be on your show.
It's such a great pleasure to have you as someone who has had a unique viewpoint on our country, certainly since the democratic transition and before. Your parents were, and your mother is a renowned activist. Tell me a bit about how they shaped and influenced your thinking.
I know there were seminal figures, obviously, in my personal life.
Yeah.
My father was, I almost call him a Calvinist priest-like figure because he had this very solid spine of belief systems, principles, and before our political involvement was always very strict about what was right, what was wrong, and had a very strong sense of belief system. And, in his personal conduct, he would wake up every morning before he showered, he'd do a half an hour of push-ups, sit-ups, and he had this philosophy of life, which I'll share with you, which is you have one life, live it. You have one body, look after it. And you have one mind, nurture it. So he was always living this. He wasn't just a figure that had these principles but didn't live it. He was very clear about it. My mom was very spunky and still is a very spunky woman.
Absolutely.
Very alive.
Yeah.
Always extremely well presented, looked after the house, made sure everything was beautifully presented, cooked beautifully, but was always very interested in South Africa's welfare. My brother was detained when I was 18. He was 21. The security police knocked on the door of the house I was staying at, and I opened the door at 4 a.m. in the morning, October 1981. And there was a mammoth security policeman figure by the name of Captain Struvic, who was legendarily known as somebody who had thrown SWAPO terrorists out of helicopters, and was a very scary figure. And he basically said, "I'm here to arrest your brother, Keith. Where is he?" He wasn't there. Effectively, he was in solitary confinement along with around 40 activists who were detained at the time. And it was the time when Neil Agate, a few cells away, was tortured and killed in prison. Was the first white detainee to die in prison. And that catapulted our family, that whole experience catapulted our family into very active anti-apartheid struggle involvement. My parents became founders with the Kachalias and various others of the Detainees Parent Support Committee, which became really a home to the tens of thousands of detainees who experienced torture, beatings, and so on in those days, in the 1980s and early 1990s. So that was the kind of catalyst for our family's involvement in the anti-apartheid struggle. And it was a journey.
And was that in some ways behind your move into student activism in the SRC, in NUSAS, I believe?
Yes.
And in those crucial years of the 80s, becoming more conscientized?
Absolutely. At the time, there was conscription into the army. So most whites who didn't want to go to the army had only really one alternative, and that was to go to university. And so many people who wouldn't necessarily have studied went to university to study. I studied architecture, and while I was studying architecture, life was unfolding on the campus.
Yeah.
And so my brother was detained at the end of my first year of architecture. And it really pushed the family, but myself, into the National Union of South African Students, the End Conscription Campaign, UDF politics, National Economic Crisis Committee, activism, and ultimately into the underground of the African National Congress, which I joined secretly in 1986. And I graduated from university in 1988 and then went to do the constitutional talks. But that journey from 81 to 88 was in parallel to my education. I was really learning the education of life because we were fighting the mother of all battles on the campuses. Your dad, Dali, Beckham Langeni, Chris Ngobo, James Maseko, Feroz Kachalia, the current Minister of Police, and my colleagues, Grant Rex, Vivian McMenamin, a whole bunch of us. I became a national publicity officer for NewsAS in 1987, which was it was really the height of student activism. And in that year, I remember Winnie Mandela coming onto the campus, which was quite a controversial thing in the student movement. And James Maseko and myself were the keynote speakers together with Winnie Mandela. And as we were starting to speak, literally there were 5,000 students on the Wits campus. And about the same equivalent number of police invaded the campus. And it was just mayhem, gun smoke, tear gas, shambocking, mass detention of students. And, was at the center of the cause of that was F.W. de Klerk, because F.W. de Klerk had become the Minister of Education a couple of months earlier and had terminated as a policy. His first policy step was to terminate subsidies for black students at white universities. And this caused the events of that day. So I always remember the epicenter of my experience of student activism, having this association with Winnie Mandela, F.W. de Klerk, and this incredible confrontation. So those days were very dark, very violent, very scary days. Thank God that's well in the past.
Love the show? Rep the movement. Tap join right here to become an SMWX member now. Support bold African media. Join the fam.
Indeed. And you briefly mentioned the transition moment that came out of those very tumultuous 80s years. And there's a picture which we might bring up on the screen of you, behind Nelson and Winnie Mandela. Tell us about the role that you played in the transition moment and some of your memories and reflections from that time when South Africa was being rebuilt and remade.
So the interesting thing was that, as part of the United Democratic Front, we had a belief that our activism in the white community, which was part of the non-racial movement, it was very important to build large, wide alliances and to reach to all kinds of communities, religious communities, as well as parts of the establishment, to try and effectively divide the establishment, make it weaker, and move to, and get more people in support of a non-racial democracy. And the business community was a key target of the movement as a whole. And there were business people, Chris Ball, Leon Cohen, Peter Wrighton, Neil Chapman, fragments of big capital that were interested in breaking the apartheid lock on business, which was causing mass unrest, sanctions, so on and so forth. And so a group of those business people formed, after meeting with ANC, UDF, and other leadership, formed something called the Consultative Business Movement, which was a vehicle for these business leaders to engage with disparate political forces with a view to supporting the transition. And I was approached after I left, I graduated as an architect in 1988. In early 1989, to join the Consultative Business Movement's executive group that was just starting. So I was the first member of the executive team, full-time member. Shortly after that, Tiens Elof joined as well. And essentially we started a movement which built discussions and conversations between prominent business people and the emerging power brokers in society. And that was both with the ANC and with the cabinet of the then South Africa. And that essentially led to, in the context of the release of Mandela and in the context of the violence that emerged, partly generated by third force elements, it led to the peace accord, which Tiens and I were very involved in, together with Frank Chikane, Jay Naidu, and others, in bringing to bear. And so we were very involved, and that led to the CBM being one of the parties that both the ANC, the National Party, and Inkatha trusted, and one of the only parties that they trusted to facilitate the Constitutional Negotiations Secretariat. So we were appointed to actually run the Secretariat, and that led us to be at the center of the Constitutional Negotiations CODESA, as it was known, and then the Multi-Party Forum negotiations platform that led to the interim constitution being agreed and the first elections. So I was very much at the front stage throughout from 1989 to 1994, and including convening the first conference at which Mandela spoke to top business people, which is where that photograph was taken that you referred to, when I was 28, I think.
Wow.
And Winnie Mandela and Nelson Mandela came to speak to 300 business people that were gathered at the Carlton Hotel. It was amazing because he'd just come back from the world tour after his release, and we'd done a lot of work in preparation for like maybe 6 months for this moment. And he came up the elevator and the escalator, and he saw me there, and he greeted me for the first time. I'd never met him before, and I said to him, "Welcome," and he said the business people are waiting inside. And he said, "I'd like to go and greet the staff first." And he went and he greeted the staff who were preparing everything at the Carlton, and then we went inside. And he was introduced by Neil Chapman to a rapturous applause by these business people that had never met him. And half of them probably thought he was the devil incarnate because he was talking about nationalization and so on, and was going to come nationalize his businesses. And so he walked up to the podium, and there was you could hear a pin drop. And he said, "I'm sorry, there's not enough light." And he sat down, and I ran up to the podium, and we arranged a light, and then he got up, with all this tension building, and he said to the audience, "I've been waiting 27 years. Mr. Relly," Gavin Relly from Anglo was his counterpart speaker, to tell you that nationalization is not the only word in the ANC's English vocabulary. And it was just such a powerful moment and such a powerful delivery. That was my first experience of him.
Wow.
And then I obviously had lots of opportunities to engage with him through the constitutional negotiations period, which climaxed in the pre-election negotiations in the midst of very, very scary violence in the country, which I'm happy to go into if you like.
What was the story of Kissinger and Mandela and Buthelezi?
So essentially, for those who may be not aware on your program, come January 94, which was literally months before the election, there was a standoff because the National Party and the ANC had agreed on the election date of 27th April, and the IFP essentially was leading what I call the stoppists, all the people who didn't want the change to happen and who were armed and dangerous.
Yeah.
And at that time, there were about 400 people dying a month in South Africa from political violence. And we knew from intelligence reports, including from the Independent Electoral Commission, that they believed there was enough arms buried throughout Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in particular, that if unleashed, had the ability to kill 1 million people in South Africa.
Wow.
And that it was critical that we found a way for the IFP to be inside the election process, or else that violence was going to be unleashed. And you must remember that was the very time that Rwanda blew up, and there were 1 million people killed in the genocide in Rwanda. So there was real concern about mass violence around the election, catalyzed at that time. And so the only thing that the ANC and the IFP could agree about, and Mandela went down to see King Zwelithini, they had bilaterals between the ANC and the IFP, was that they should have international mediation to try and resolve the differences ahead of the election. And the CBM was again called upon to be the facilitator of the international mediation, with Henry Kissinger as the lead. There was Lord Carrington and a bunch of 5 other justices from around the world identified.
Yeah.
And I was at the center. Tiens by that time had left the CBMs kind of on a day-to-day basis to run the CODESA talks. And I was running essentially the CBM offices. And we effectively were asked by the ANC one day whether we would be prepared to be the facilitator of the mediation. And this was with the IFP, and the IFP agreed, and we had to decide whether to do it. And essentially it was a poison chalice. We knew it was going to be incredibly difficult to do it, but the stakes were so high, there was no alternative. We had to do it. I remember John Hall, who was the head of Barlow Rand and also the head of the Peace Secretariat, talking and saying, look, we really have no option but to do this. And so with about 2 weeks to go before the election, we had a series of meetings at the CBM between the IFP and the ANC in which we had to agree the terms of the mediation. It's a longer story than I can go into here, but just to say, Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma were the 2 ANC negotiators. Mlolozi and Mario Ambrosini, legendary figures on the IFP side, were the IFP people. And it was really interesting for me that Mbeki and Zuma at the time were Siamese twins. They were the best friends. There was nothing that could separate them.
Wow.
And the one left the meeting, the other talked on behalf of both. And Mbeki intervened at one point and basically said, because the election, the holding of the election was the key issue that stopped us from agreeing the terms of mediation. He said basically, let's stay silent on the question of the elections on the basis that we know that the election will be happening on the 27th of April, and let the mediators come in. And the IFP relented on that because they were insisting that the election be included. And on that basis, we were able to proceed. Kissinger came on the basis of the international mediation terms of reference being agreed. At the launch, where there was a mass of media, this was 10 days before the election, at the Carlton Hotel, Kissinger gave this talk. Vali Musa, as the chief negotiator of the ANC, came to me and said, Colin, we have a fundamental problem. The ANC negotiations team disagrees. So this was Sir Ramaphosa, Joe Slovo, Mac Maharaj, Valley. And we insist on the elections being explicitly excluded from the international mediation terms. So there was effectively a stalemate. Kissinger and the team stayed at the Carlton Hotel trying to negotiate independently with Mandela, Buthelezi and de Klerk. It fell apart, and Kissinger did the only thing he could do, is he said, the parties are choosing for this to not go ahead. You're going to stare at the consequences, and you have to deal with the consequences, and he left. And on the back of us now looking into the apocalypse of an election which would more likely precipitate violence than not, Washington Nkumu, who was one of the mediators, and myself got together. He called me one night and he said, this is the night that Kissinger left. And he said he'd been talking to Buthelezi. He couldn't talk to me on the phone, but he needed to see me. So I left a dinner and I went to see him, and he told me that basically Buthelezi, he'd persuaded Buthelezi that subject to certain conditions, which were international mediation post-election, that they'd be included in the ballot, and the sovereignty of the Zulu kingdom would be guaranteed in the constitution. There'd be amendments made to that extent, that he would participate in the election, notwithstanding the differences. And he was basically asking me to help him negotiate this with the parties. He had secretly had discussions already with the government, with the F.W. de Klerk through his channels, and he was in discussion with Buthelezi, but he had no contact with the ANC. So I basically, through the office of Jesse Duarte, asked for a meeting with Mandela. Murray Hofmeyer, Mike Spicer from Anglo American, and myself went to see Mandela, and basically persuaded him that this was a moment that South Africa couldn't let slip. He had come from an election rally in Cape Town, where 3 people had died, and he was very distracted, very upset. But when we presented him with this alternative, he'd focused very sharply, unbelievable leadership, called F.W. de Klerk, said to him that this opportunity had arisen. It would require certain concessions. He had lots of worries. He went through those worries with us in a very clear manner. And he and de Klerk agreed that it was worth attempting to negotiate. And we went basically with an agreement to put this agreement that Nkumu and I had written to the parties, and that they would meet the next day. I went back to Johannesburg. Cyril Ramaphosa phoned me at 1 a.m. and said, is this real? Because we don't have time if it's not for real. Yeah. And I said to him, look, too much rides on this. You have to lean in. Yeah. It is real. The IFP Central Executive Committee had voted in favor of it. We had made sure that that was the case. We had spoken to the IEC to make sure that there was the possibility of putting the IFP on the election platform. The printing ballots had been actually printed already. So the only way to deal with that was to have a sticker with the IFP on the sticker. And that's how we managed to get the agreement. 2 days later, the agreement was agreed and signed in front of a very surprised world and a very surprised South Africa. And we managed to get a relatively peaceful election held within a week. As you know, the IFP won 10%, and the ANC effectively won, if I recall, 63%, and the National Party 20%. And that brought about South Africa's first effective coalition government, and a peaceful election, which was way away from the worst case outcome that we feared.
How do you compare that government of national unity with the one we have now, and what are the similarities and differences?
Well, the ANC was overwhelmingly the majority government. But at the same time, it was very smart in the way it managed to include the National Party in the Government of National Unity. You remember all parties over 10% were represented in the cabinet.
Yeah, sure.
So you effectively had certain NP cabinet ministers, including F.W. Clerk as the deputy president, and you had Mbeki as another deputy president. And I think that when you look back, A, the cabinet was half the size of the cabinet today. B, you had Mandela really providing vision and unity and reconciliation at the time. And the IFP was kind of co-opted, I think, from a having been in a very polarized environment. They were brought on board, and Buthelezi worked with that Government of National Unity. And then ultimately, of course, the National Party withdrew, which was a historic mistake for them because they literally disappeared very quickly. Whereas this Government of National Unity, the ANC is not a majority party, but acts as a majority party.
Yeah.
And the DA is probably too weak to be as powerful as it needs to be. But I happen to think that our next Government of National Unity may look and feel quite different, which is the way the politics of South Africa is unfolding. It certainly looks like the ANC support in the country is declining. So declining from 41%, and the DA support is increasing from 23%. So the possibility that over time the ANC will move more towards 30% and the DA more towards the 30% mark will mean that a next Government of National Unity, whenever that may be, and I've made some comments that it may be sooner than people think, is likely to be more of an equilibrium. And that will produce a situation where the ANC has to be more attentive to it not being a majority party and also possibly not being the biggest party by a big margin. So that will produce a very different power balance, I believe, that might actually be constructive for South Africa at this point in time.
I'm with you on the electoral dynamics. Say more a bit about why you think it could be sooner than we think.
Okay, so that brings us more to the present.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm chairman of the Youth Employment Service. So and my business involvement has been very much in the economic realm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though my background was in struggle politics and so on and so forth, I went into Goldman Sachs.
CEO of Sub-Saharan Africa.
25 years in banking. And I've been very involved in the political economy of South Africa.
That's
for the past 30 years.
That would be fair to say.
So my perspective, going back a few years, we started the Youth Employment Service in 2018.
Yeah.
Maybe just quickly to say, we're about to celebrate a milestone of 200,000 youth being placed in around 2,000 businesses in South Africa for 1-year internships, generating around 12 billion rand of salaries for these 200,000 interns, 40% of whom get full-time jobs at the end of the one-year internships, which means we're one of the biggest job creators in South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is quite a depressing statistic because this economy should be creating many more jobs, but it's not.
Yeah.
And so my perspective has been that, I wrote the 2 Decades of Freedom report in 2013 when I was at Goldman Sachs. And that showed that growth up until that point on average was 3.3% from 1994 to 2013. The record since is that from 2014 till now, we've grown at 1%, and our overall GDP of $400 billion today is the same as it was in 2011. So we have not grown in dollarized GDP terms in 15 years.
Sure.
So it's very concerning because our population growth is roughly 1.5%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So therefore, the country is getting poorer.
Yeah, in
we
per
have
capita terms.
Yeah, and we have unemployment now that's risen, even through the Ramaphosa years from 2018 till now, to a net, including those who have given up looking for work, of 43%. When you have structural unemployment of 43%, the degree of inequality we have in South Africa and the racial issues, thank goodness we don't have religious issues, but we have the racial issues in that mix, you have a structurally fundamental problem in the economy. So you have a growth trap of 1% for 15 years, unemployment 43%.
Yeah.
So I started to talk in 2022 about the need for us to open the economy to all in a very active way, or kiss our democracy goodbye. And the reason I put it that way is because the unemployed and the marginalized are not stupid. They're very alive to their circumstance. If you have over half the country in food poverty, the response of the group that is marginalized from the formal economy will obviously be to look for economic opportunity in all ways. Those ways can be informal, the informal economy, can be the illegal economy, and it can be straight criminal activity. What we've been seeing essentially through the state capture years is the state being used by a particular family, group of politicians, and a formation around a person that became known as state capture. But essentially through the breaking of the state institutions in the Zuma years, it created the space for criminal networks to imbue the ANC, to imbue the state. And it became obvious to business people in the construction industry, in the taxi industry, in the mining industry, and so on and so forth, that these criminal networks were becoming more aggressive, more organized, and yet the rule of law. I always remember Jabu Mabuza, who passed, and who was president of Business Leadership South Africa when I was on the board, saying, the failure of the rule of law means there's no consequence for bad behavior. And when there's no consequence, it provides the space for people to effectively have wrongdoing without any consequence.
Even reward at times.
And then get the reward. And they see in the context of this unemployment, food poverty, and so on, the opportunities and the reward that comes, as you say.
Yeah.
And so in 2022, I wrote this article saying, essentially, open the economy to all or kiss democracy goodbye, in which I basically said, unless we succeed in growing the economy and providing opportunity, and I laid out various policy measures for that to happen, then we are going to create the space for rising criminal elements and the merging of political and criminal networks. Essentially, the problem being that if you're outside the economic system and you don't have the skills, but you are politically savvy, you can see that the political channel provides the mechanism for you to find your way to economic opportunity through procurement, through state largesse, and the patronage system of politics provides you R1 trillion a year of procurement income to try and siphon off, and that we would see the rising of gangsters dressed in Gucci outside the Constitutional Court eating off the flesh and the blood of our democracy. And that's what that article said. It was a warning that unless we change the economic trajectory to provide inclusive growth for a much wider group of people, that we were going to create the space for gangsterism in South Africa. Unfortunately, that leads us to today, because we now see with the Madlanga Commission the evidence that there has been an extensive criminalization of the state, the evidence that gangsterism is feeding off public interest and public goods, and that this has become highly organized and has infested our state institutions, including the police, the health department, the education department, and others. And the killing of Babita Deokaran, and I watched your Jeff Wicks interview, is extremely concerning evidence that these things are happening on a very systemic and wide basis.
Ready to take your podcast to the next level? At Ayeye Studios, you can film, edit, and release your podcast all in one place. From crisp visuals to clean sound, we've got you covered, and we can even distribute your podcast on YouTube and other platforms. The best part? It's brought to you by the same team that brings you SMWX quality. Are you ready to take your podcast to the next level? Welcome to Ayeye Studios. Do you think that represents a failure of the Ramaphosa years? Because the president came in on a wave of optimism that the Zuma state capture disgraceful period would be turned around.
Yeah.
And yet we find ourselves many years later with revelations which are probably equally disturbing.
Yeah. So I think the hope, and I was very involved in fighting the Zuma period when I was at Business Leadership South Africa and the Save South Africa campaign, the CEO initiative with Pravin Gordhan, and the Youth Employment Service came out of the CEO initiative together with the SME Fund of Adrian Gore.
Sure.
And others that followed, the Solidarity Fund that A.D. Enthoven drove. So we were very much part of fighting that and supporting the rise of an alternative.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of risk in my Goldman Sachs career.
I bet, actually.
In supporting the rise of Ramaphosa. I was actually on the ANC banners, basically calling for people to support him. And
how did the Goldman people respond?
They were
to that?
very tolerant, actually.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it was a properly discussed question, whether one would do that. So it was sanctioned in that sense.
Sure.
But people were very aware in the system. And obviously we had hopes, right, that in 2017-18, that when President Ramaphosa prevailed, that we would see a quick turnaround. There were many people who felt that, the decline that we'd seen under Zuma, that was very sharp, would not only be slowed, but we'd be able to turn things around. And clearly that has not happened. Clearly, if anything, the decline has been slowed. In other words, we had a less steep decline than we would have had under Zuma.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
But have we turned things around? I think there's some people who believe that we've reached a bottom, that the FATF grey listing being released, the upgrade by the rating agencies from 3 notches below investment grade to 2 notches below investment grade, and staying on a positive outlook.
Eskom,
the turnaround at Eskom, the signs of turnaround at Transnet, the Madlanga Commission and the Zondo Commission having been held and aired, that these are signs of success. And certainly one would say you must recognize those as successes. And I think there's a mood of optimism amongst the business leadership at this moment that these things are indications of a turnaround. I'm somewhat concerned that the fundamentals are not sufficiently robust and that this might turn out to be a false bottom. So we're at the bottom, but it may turn out to be a false bottom. Why do I say that? Essentially, in order for us to absorb the unemployed every year, we need growth of 3%.
Sure.
That's to maintain our unemployment rate at the rate at which it is. Every year we don't have this level of growth means that more people are not able to come to the economy that are being absorbed. There's about 200,000 people absorbed into the economy at this rate a year, about 500,000 new entrants. So unless we grow the new jobs, And unless we grow the economy net to around 3%, we are going to grow unemployment further to higher rates. We I think, have a consensus that growth in the following year will likely be 1.1% and then 1.6%. Nobody's talking about above 2% growth rates.
Yeah.
So that means in the medium term, according to the statistics just released at the medium-term budget statement, that while our debt is going to stabilize around 78%, debt to GDP around 78%, the growth rates are not going to reach the levels required to eat into unemployment. And because of that, the circumstances, the foundations for the unemployment problem to fester criminality and gangsterism in South Africa is not going to be turned around. So what do we need? We need a sharp focus on two things. One is the application of the rule of law, which is why the Madlanga Commission is so critical.
Sure.
I'm not a securities expert, but one would think that an overhaul of the institutions of security and policing and the National Prosecuting Authority and so on, a much sharper leadership function and a much more accountable leadership function of that needs to be brought to bear in a very, very dramatic way.
Absolutely.
And on the economy, we're going to have to undertake a qualitative step up in our economic policies and in our economic management in order to get better results. And that's something we could go into in more detail.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you've said there is so important on a number of levels. One, about this false bottom, which terrifies me, because there's still a far way to slide if we're not careful. The second is on what I would call vanity metrics in terms of our economy. You know, the grey listing and foreign bodies having more confidence in us. Without us, I mean, maybe with the exception of Eskom, because that is fundamental to growth, without us reshaping inequality or unemployment, we can get caught in these vanity metrics and a false optimism can start to build. And my worry is false optimism can also be very dangerous, because then we sit back and all kinds of things can happen when we sit back. So how do we, because what has struck me about your public commentary over the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years, is you've been constantly calling for us to do something more bold than just massage the debt numbers and keep inflation stable. Not to say that those things are bad, but we're not gonna reshape South Africa by keeping everything in its proper place and not tinkering or really actually fundamentally doing something different.
It's frustrating, man.
Yeah. How do we do something different, for goodness sake? Yeah.
So let me say where I think things are going well.
Sure.
I think the fact that Eskom is being turned around is fundamental.
Agreed.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
Eskom's net debt to EBITDA, which is the most important financial matrix, has come from 11, 12 times to about 5.5, 6 times. But 5.5, 6 times is still amongst the worst utilities in the world in terms of debt matrix.
Yeah. And look, I mean, having electricity is kind of the most basic prerequisite for any economic growth. It's not itself some amazing achievement.
Well, and the pricing of the electricity is not cheap. We used to have the cheapest electricity in the world. We're now very expensive electricity for homes and businesses. And Transnet is doing better. I think the Transport Minister, Barbara Creecy, should get all the credit. Seems to be pushing aggressively for opening the rail and the port system to private networks. This is critical and must happen. Second thing I want to say is the SARB is providing world-class leadership. And I've, throughout my commentary, which has criticized the fiscal side, and I'll get to that, I've been very clear that the Saab's management of monetary policy has been world-class. The fact that we're now at a 3% inflation target, and you can see the benefit of that in bond yields and in the rand and the currency, has real meaningful impact on the economy.
Sure.
The miners don't like it, by the way, because the rand exchange rate has strengthened by about 10%.
Sure, yeah. So exports
But I don't think that we should be crying for them, given the commodity prices in gold and platinum
Fair, yeah.
being as attractive as they are. And gold, platinum, and coal are the three commodities that drive our exports.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just need to get more. We need the regulator to allow more exports to happen, and the logistics have to support it. But it's really the fiscal side and then industrial policy side that is letting this country down. So people get excited, as you say, about the debt levels peaking at 78% and so on. By the way, our debt levels are not very high compared to many other countries in the world.
Sure.
It's the cost of interest that really hurts us. It's the cost of the debt that hurts us, and that's why this bringing the bond yields down is so important. But what we need policies for economic growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have, as I said, very high poverty levels. Frankly, if the Democratic Alliance was to be the government and it had 100% of the government tomorrow, they would do nothing with the SRD grant. No government is able to get rid of that SRD grant because it's holding up millions of families, maybe 10 million families that the SRD grant is supporting. So this whole discussion around basic income is I think, rather quite misled. And you saw that the minister has basically extended, without any further discussion, the SRD grant into 2027, which is very good because it takes off the table an uncertainty.
Sure.
So, but what we definitely need is growth supporting initiatives, and we need to create fiscal space for those growth supporting initiatives. One of the things I've talked about, and Minister Mboweni called for, and by the way, Minister Mboweni was also the catalyst for Operation Vulindlela, which is leading these reforms. And, so he provided very strong leadership on these issues. So he called for zero-based budgeting. And the reason we need zero-based budgeting is after 30 years, we've built up a whole bunch of programs which are taking fiscal space that are not creating bang for the buck.
Yeah.
And we need a very deep, and I've been calling for this now for probably a year, we need a very deep exercise, not a superficial exercise, seeking to cut budget spending on superfluous items, things that are not working. The CETAs, for example, that's 28 billion rand that is going into a project that many people think is not producing results. There are many line items, but essentially what we need is a group of experts, and they should probably be independent experts, appointed by the president and the treasury to advise it on take 10% of the budget and advise where the least impact expenditures are that we can then save 10% of the budget, rechannel, let's say half of that into high multiplier spending. What would those be?
Yeah.
SARS. Give SARS more resources because they're a very high multiplier. You give them more resources. The commissioner will tell you, give me 10 billion, I'll give you 80 billion back from it.
Yeah, sure.
The National Prosecuting Authority, who doesn't have the resources, we should be giving them all the resources to fight crime, to fight gangsterism,
Absolutely.
to get the best AI, to get the best experts on the beat, the best prosecutors, and so on and so forth. So say, how can we recycle low impact expenditure into high multiplier expenditure and then actually generate savings that we can bring the debt further down? These high multiplier opportunities should also look for where are we going to grow the industrial and manufacturing base? How can we provide the kind of support that ironically the Trump administration and the Biden administration were both giving to the United States industry How do we provide the subsidies, the tariff protection? How do we provide the various incentives to industry to be protected on the one hand and to generate more exports and generate more spending in the South African consumer space? I'm on the board of the Foschini Group. There is so much that is being done to localize manufacturing by Foschini, for example. And if there was a regulatory environment that supported small enterprises, I've called for a grant, which I believe can be very inexpensive, maybe 16 billion rand, that can provide 5,000 rand per business for micro enterprises. There are about 2.5 million micro enterprises in South Africa. Can you imagine if those people were to provide some evidence that they are running a micro enterprise and get 5,000 rand, what they would do to multiply both jobs and income off those businesses? Growth in jobs is not going to only come from large companies. Under the right circumstances, large companies like Shoprite have been, Capitec have been adding jobs. But it's going to come from the medium and the small and the micro enterprises in South Africa. We have to have much better regulation for them. Smart governance, smart economic policy, there is a lot that we can do. But I would say two things. One is policies and the other is management. What I've learned in business is you can have all the right policies, all the right business plans. If you don't have the right mix of people in your executive and in your support structures and the right reviewing mechanisms to see and check, are we doing the right things? Is it having the right impact? Is it meeting the goals? Are the key performance indicators on track? Then you don't get the results you need. And we need to have a much higher quality of mix of people in the state, in the economic cluster. This is both trade and industry and in finance to produce these kind of results.
You mentioned what other nations are doing, and it reminded me of one of the big foreign policy geopolitical questions we have, which is the US and South Africa right now. You spend a lot of time in the US, both in your role in business, in banking, and at the intersection of business and academia. You've done a lot of thinking from the US, but also between South Africa and the US. How do you interpret this moment, and what do you think is the right way for South Africa to deal with a belligerent Trump administration, which to me doesn't seem like it is going to change its tune on some of these issues that are red meat to the MAGA base about, the persecution of white South Africans and all this, my word, nonsense that we're hearing out of the Trump White House, which is nonetheless an important trading partner who we have to speak to.
I was going to start there. The geopolitical and economic reality is that the giants in the world today are the United States and China. They account for half of the world's GDP. So you cannot pretend that we can displace what the US provides us by going to open new markets elsewhere.
Sure.
And we can waste a lot of time trying to get new investment from much more minor players, not unimportant players. But if you look at the top 100 companies by market cap in the world, essentially half of them in the United States, 25% in China, and 25% everywhere else.
Interesting.
And we need that 75% from the United States and China to have a favorable view of South Africa. And we need to create an investment environment that those companies, never mind the governments, see as attractive. What does that mean? We need to have our diplomats and our business people interacting with their counterparts in China and the United States, and in a smart way, engaging with those business people and say, we'd love you to invest in South Africa, or you're invested in South Africa, we'd like to now build an assembly plant, build a data center, manufacture for the African time zone. We have the largest opportunity, demographic opportunity on our doorstep, which is Africa. Africa is going to go from the current 17% of the world's population to 48% of the world's population in the next 75 years. And this is going to create markets, opportunities, and the AfCFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement in Africa, is going to be key as a variable. So the geopolitics we talk about with this administration in the United States is a spot in time where we need to smartly engage with the administration, and we can't give up. We can't say, oh, this is an administration we can't deal with. We have to deal with the reality we have, not the reality we wish for. They are 28% of the world's economy. They have the most powerful business engine in the world, some of the most powerful innovators, both in technology and in thought leadership in places like Columbia University, where I teach. And we have to engage in a very smart way. What does smart engagement mean? It means listening to what they have to say and then seeing what we can do to accommodate where necessary through domestic policy tweaking. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we don't need to be dictated to by any administration anywhere in the world. It's not what I'm suggesting, but we should be smart about how we engage. And first of all, we need a diplomatic channel that works. We don't have it.
Yeah.
I think there are plans to put in place an ambassador now. And from what I hear in the White House, the names suggested would be welcomed. So I think there may be some advances. Some of the things are unfortunately probably cooked now. We've lost the opportunity to engage. And so, when the concrete hardens, it's very difficult to mold it into something different. So it may be difficult now for us to find each other, but we can't give up on that. And at the end of the day, the administration to administration issue is one thing. The company to company issue and the investment climate is another.
Yeah.
I would just say finally on China, I spent a huge amount of my career. I was responsible for the ICBC investment into Standard Bank, Jinchuan into Metrix, the Discovery Ping An transaction, various of them. And I was 20 times in China between 2007 and when I retired from Goldman Sachs in 2020. And this is a very promising environment. The Chinese have a very long-range view of Africa, and they see South Africa as one of the main engines of Africa to partner with.
Yeah.
So I think we have a great opportunity with China in terms of capital, innovation, technology, and don't count China out on AI and technology and so on and so forth. They're very much at the front, cutting edge, together with the United States.
Yeah.
So not all is lost. I do believe we should be spending 80% of our time on 20% of the problem, which is China and the United States, and focusing there. Right now, we don't have an ambassador in China, and we don't have an ambassador in the United States.
Yeah, that is quite unsettling when you think of the geopolitical tectonic plates that are shifting right now. Just that's Standard Bank deal is quite an important economic moment where Chinese investment comes into a traditional South African bank, and I know you were central in that deal. Talk us through its importance for the future of, as you say, investment into the South African economy, and what can be learned from that.
The ICBC investment in Standard Bank, which was 2008, closed in 2008, just pre-global financial crisis, $2 billion was in primary capital, meaning it went into the bank capital, and $3.5 billion went to shareholders to buy out their shares. That $2 billion probably saved South Africa's financial system in the global financial crisis.
Wow.
Because the Standard Bank really needed that capital for its capital ratios going into the global financial crisis.
Sure, and it wouldn't have been able to get it from Europe or possibly the US, right?
With the global financial crisis zooming in within 6 months of the deal closing, it's unlikely that they would have been able to attract that capital, and we would have been in a very different situation in South Africa, because if any one of the major banks had any capital issues, it would have caused major stress in the financial system. So that's the importance of that transaction historically. But more than that, it lit the imagination about what is possible between emerging markets. The fact that China would invest $5.5 billion for a 20% stake in a large South African bank as a platform for African trade and investment and so on, finance flows. Really, it opened the eyes of the investment community in a way that didn't exist before. I think ICBC, like the Chinese, have a very long-term view. They don't see things in quarters. They took a view on investing. As you know, they haven't increased and they haven't decreased their stake. They would love to have been able to increase their stake, but there were regulatory wiring put in place at the time to make it more difficult for ICBC to increase their stake because Standard Bank wanted to have the right to essentially make sure that they approved of any further increase in the stake. It was a way of protecting Standard Bank from being taken over. And the regulator was very involved in that. So now, years later, ICBC has this fantastic platform into Africa. Standard Bank is, if anything, it's doing best in its whole portfolio is in Africa relative to everybody else, all its competitors. And for the Chinese, they wanted to have a platform to be able to play off the finance flows of infrastructure in Angola, in Nigeria, and throughout Africa. And then Standard Bank has an office in China, providing it with a footprint into China and being able to facilitate flows into Africa through the Standard Bank network. So this was a reciprocal relationship that I think has worked well. I could regale you with stories about why Standard Bank and not other banks, because we took it to one or two others. But Standard Bank saw the opportunity. Jacob Marie and Derek Cooper worked with me, and took that opportunity and met Chairman Zhang from ICBC and made it happen. I could also tell you very funny stories. Actually, the chairman of the PBRC, which is the SARB of China, his name is Dr. Pang. We called him the general because he was the guy who would bang the table and basically say when Chairman Zhang left the room, now let's stop talking, let's get on with things in Chinese, in Mandarin, and we'd have this translated discussion. And for months, we worked with Dr. Pan, the general, on negotiating documentation. And when we finally came in October 2007 to announce the deal, it closed in 2008. He pitched up at the announcement at the Sandton Convention Center. And when we arranged a translator, he spoke in perfect English at the announcement of the transaction. We went to him afterwards and we said, we weren't aware that you spoke English. He said every night when he got back to his home, he had an English teacher come and help him and coach him in English. So by the time the announcement came, he was speaking reasonably good English. It was just amazing to see.
Look at that. Wow, that's a very interesting economic moment for our country. I have one other thing that I'm very curious about before I let you go, because I know I can't detain you for the whole day, but we probably could talk about stories for the whole day. 2017, do you have any memories or stories from that ANC conference that was such a turning point for our country, where we had that knife's edge election? Cyril Ramaphosa ended up winning against Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, but as you say, you rose in the public consciousness because you were seen there, and now we know that Goldman Sachs knew you were going to be seen there as well. How do you reflect on that particular moment, and what was it like being behind the scenes of that transition in ANC and South African leadership?
Well, I mean, clearly for the country, it was a moment of great optimism. We'd lived with this daily assault about state capture for a decade.
Yeah.
And there was finally this possibility that we were going to have a renaissance of leadership, of thinking, of a partnership between not only business and government, but business, civil society and government, to evoke the memory of Mandela, the spirit of Mandela. I'm writing a book. It's trying to talk about chasing the Mandela dream. It's through my life from the start till now, story of modern South Africa through my own experience. And by the way, people should join my LinkedIn as well and participate there, because that's a good platform I use.
Yeah.
But that moment, I think, was in many ways squandered because the spirit provided the opportunity for leadership in many of our judgment that went beyond the politics of the ANC.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could effectively use the wave, that tsunami of hope and optimism, to get the ANC to do things that not necessarily the ANC was ready for.
I don't think since 94 we had felt that kind of public hope.
Correct. And I and many other people think that was the president's moment. Now, at the end of the day, he's the president. He's got to use his judgment as to how far he can go in a particular situation within the politics of the movement.
Sure.
I mean, personally, I've always been very respectful, even if I was involved and others were involved in supporting him. We would never cross the line in terms of what's appropriate. Once he's the president, once the party machinery is in place, it's up to them to make their judgments, right, about what to do.
Sure.
So we can provide guidance, encouragement, and so on, but it's really up to him to make those decisions. So I think the key disappointment was the quality of cabinet that came out on the back of his being appointed as president in 2018.
I remember that day so well.
People could immediately see that the ANC was not responding to the moment.
Yeah.
And it was kind of an intra-party compromise, set of compromises that brought that about. And when you look now post the Zondo Commission at the names of people who were in that cabinet, who were named in the Zondo Commission as being deserving of criminal investigation, and then subsequent appointments. So when we talk about the appointment of people, as an executive, whether you're the president of a country, the CEO of a company, however large or small, it's the people that will determine the quality of execution. We, going back to this dual flashpoints of the rule of law and economic growth, we know that the people that are appointed to govern that cluster, the security cluster or the economic cluster of cabinet, are going to determine the line of travel and the quality of execution. Some people think on the economic side that, as I mentioned to you, in the business sector, these rays of light that are there. And I'm saying, well, maybe we're at a bottom, maybe we're at a false bottom. And many of the business community think we're at the bottom and we're turning things around. Adi Enthoven, who's a very remarkably well-respected and thoughtful person, wrote a piece that basically explained that on the back of these logistics reforms, Eskom, Transnet, the FATF grey list, the sovereign upgrade, and various reforms, that if we're patient, we will see economic growth uptick, and we're at the beginning of a turnaround. He does warn, as clearly he's listened to my views on gangsterism and the criminal capture of the state, that these issues around criminal capture are a potential the biggest negative to that outcome. But there are people that think that if we carry on doing what we're doing, we will see the benefits, and we must just be patient, and we shouldn't change tack. But my view is we need to make these policy adjustments to accelerate economic growth, and we need to put in place much better economic management, much higher people skills into the system. And, what I would say is that, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the extent to which the government national unity becomes in a next iteration much more balanced, I think there is more likelihood that you get meritocracy rising in the appointment of people.
Sure.
Because right now the president actually came out, he talked about an economic emergency, if you remember a month ago, and he talked about meritocracy being the only basis of appointments, but we don't see it, do we?
Yeah.
So we would encourage him down that road, but I think that a more balanced government of national unity where the DA and the ANC are far closer, I still think the ANC will be the largest party in the next iteration. And I do think that the pressures are building so strongly in society, we haven't touched on this point, that it's more likely than not that an early election will be held.
Wow.
Under the Constitution.
Okay.
I know when you talked to Prince, he was saying, no, he doesn't want to have an early election that challenges the Constitution, and he'll be out on the battlefield against it.
Yeah.
But when I say that I think an early election is likely, I think it's likely within the bounds of the constitutional provisions,
absolutely.
Either through a resignation of the president due to pressures in the party. You were also talking about the coming municipal elections this time next year.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine if, as people are predicting, the ANC's electoral result is shambolic and is highly disappointing, that will create its own pressures.
Absolutely.
In the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And I think the pressures are going to build in society. We've seen Arab Springs in other countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
We saw our own July 2021 moment.
Yeah.
We don't know what's coming, but my political nose and my nose from all that I've seen over time, these pressures are that there's no pressure valve to let them out at this point in time. I think that it will build in the ruling party. I think it will build in society. It's not something I'm calling for.
Sure.
But I'm suggesting to you that an earlier election through one or other constitutional means is likely to happen.
Wow.
And in that situation, I do believe the ANC and the DA will emerge in a coalition government far closer. I think MKP and the EFF are unlikely to rise. They're unlikely to combine. And one of them might do better than the other and feed off the other's coattails. But I think that the next iteration, we're likely to see a coalition government of the ANC and the DA that is a true coalition, not one party that is treating the other as a minority party. And in that context, meritocracy may rise and the quality of both policy and people management may improve.
That's a very fascinating suggestion. And I do feel, even though we had, and I had a chat with political analyst Lukhona Mnguni also on this channel, where he suggested the same thing, that in fact an early election is necessary. Even though we had an election so recently, there is a sense in which, again, here, I can only also base it on my own reading of the people I speak to, that there's a need for some kind of shakeup. It sounds silly because we just had a huge shakeup, but I feel like the election was an earthquake, but the aftershocks haven't yet been felt yet because of the way the ANC was able to consolidate in the negotiations. And that has created a sense of dejection because South Africans rejected the ANC, but it has effectively come back much more powerful than it should have. And so there is this inbuilt tension and a need for some kind of fundamental political shakeup, not in 2029. That's too far.
Yeah, I think, if we had to say 3.5 years from now, we're going to have an election, I think the evidence given the fundamentals: food poverty, rising crime, lawlessness. As I left my home, which is in a wealthy suburb of South Africa, sewage running down the street, potholes in my road, never mind what's happening in the townships. On so many fronts, this level of unemployment, the level of growth trap that we're in, there are so many forces at play that I think is unlikely that we can have 3.5 years go by without a new mandate for a new government.
Yeah. Does the president want to carry on, do you think?
Look, I think my view, by the way, is I think the president is an honest person.
Sure.
I think he's got the best interests of the country at heart. I think he's a decent person. I think he likes being in power. He loves traveling around the world. He will love the G20 this week with the presidents coming and so on. I don't think he's not a shake the tree person. I don't think he wants to shake the tree with the ANC. I don't think he will put himself at risk. I know he was reportedly saying, if you want to vote me out of the NEC, go be my guest this weekend. That maybe was a brave statement given his relative statements. But I don't see him as somebody who's going to shake this tree. I think that he enjoys being president. He won't overstay his welcome, but I think he will stay as long as the country and the party wants him. And I think he has the best intentions to do things. I think, watching Prince Mashele, there'd other views out there about the person and so on. But the criminality and the gangsterism within the state that has been permitted either through acts of omission or acts of commission. I happen to think many of them are acts of omission, looking the other way, are unforgivable. The Babita Dokaran story, which I know moved you personally deeply. The stories about these gangsters making 250, 500 million rand off public health facilities under the nose of everybody. This couldn't have escaped the provincial government, the central government, the ANC party machinery. This is unacceptable. And what I have said is I believe there's a coalition of the willing South African patriots between business, civil society, the union movement, who need to wake up more aggressively. They played such an important role in the 1980s and 90s. They unfortunately are a sleeping giant at this point. But everyone, and the good forces within the public service and the good forces within the ANC and all other political parties must mobilize to defeat the scourge of criminality that is threatening to overtake the country.
Colin Coleman, it's been such a joy to have you on this platform. Thank you very much, not only for gracing us, but for the tremendous contribution you've made to our country and our economy over many years, and long may it continue.
Thank you so much, Sizwe.
Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Help us reach our next milestone of 400,000 subscribers by the end of this year. And keep it locked on SMWX. Aye.